I am so excited to announce this first guest. I'm really honored to announce his first guest. I'm going to read some of the stuff that he's done here in a second, but I'm going to take a brief moment just to explain how we first met him. Paula and I and Chelsea and a couple of our team members went up to a small place called Bonanza, Oregon, to listen to the working circle talk to ranchers about how to coexist with wolves. We drove all the way up there and took all the magnets and signs off our cars and tried to blend. I have Paula and Chelsea with me. We did not blend up there. But anyway, we walked in and quietly sat in the back of what was the library, and I think there was more books in our living room than there is in this library. It was tiny, tiny, tiny town, and all of these wonderful people were speaking. But Carter Niemeyer, when we first walked in the door, we heard ranchers talking about how wolves will follow you home, they'll kill your kids, all the stuff that you think you're never really going to hear from a real person, and we heard it. What Carter did was tell the truth, but the way that he tells the truth is a way that everyone can understand. Advocates can understand. He speaks to ranchers on their own terms. They listen to him. He has a way of telling people something that is the truth, and they may not believe me from crystal crunching, tree hugging California, but they'll certainly listen to Carter Niemeyer, and he is a valuable, valuable asset to wolves. And I'm just so honored to announce him today and to have him come up and talk. And I'm just going to read the stuff that I'm supposed to read. He was the wolf manager for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services in Idaho, retired in 2006, former trapper, district supervisor, and wolf management specialist for the USDA. Wildlife Services in Montana, master's degrees from Iowa State University, author of 2 memoirs, and owns 2 poodles. And he is an amazing human being, and I'm so honored to announce Carter Niemeyer, please.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I guess I'm on hot wire here. Very good, thank you. Good to be here. I just come back from Colorado doing workshops down there, 4 above 0, and so glad to change into nicer clothing here. So anyway, I'm going to just give you a short presentation, try and make it simple and understandable, but when you see this short story on the politics of wolf management, you're going to see it's a loaded deck. Wolves just carry baggage from the beginning of time, and they're feared, and they're hated. And then, of course, being part of the federal government program to reintroduce them, they're symbolic of federal government imposing them on people. So the wolf, though it has a lot of friends, the majority of people, I think, in the United States like wolves, but very few people are involved in taking care of them, supporting them. And you'll see that we successfully reintroduced wolves, and they really need your help. I think I'll try to condense it down, but they're being persecuted, and they're prolific, and they're resilient, and they're on their own right now. There's not a whole lot people can do for them other than just allow them to live. But there's a lot of powers in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana right now that are trying to do their best to eliminate wolves down to a very, very small number again. So I'm hoping everybody here will go home and volunteer, contribute, or encourage your friends to get involved, because these wolves need people to support them, because there's a very minor number of people who are persecuting them, and the political system is allowing that to happen. So some of this I'll just let you read, and I also mixed in some photos as we talk. So you remember we're talking about living wolves and the politics that's affecting them. Paul Arrington was a professor at my alma mater at Iowa State University. So anyway, without going into depth, I think you're all aware that ever since European settlement from east to west, Wolves once were some of the most widely distributed mammals next to human beings on Earth. And in a very short time after European settlement began, they were virtually eliminated from the lower 48 states, with the exception of a few hundred up in northern Minnesota. And finally, they were protected under the Endangered Species Act. However, you have to realize that no matter, even as an endangered animal, we kept killing them for livestock damage. So they were never fully protected. The killing of wolves has never stopped. Wolves were relisted as a species in 1978, and that was a good foundation for the wolf reintroduction, because then we're not splitting hairs over subspecies. People worried about which wolf we were going to reintroduce. The only wolf we could reintroduce was the one next door in Canada, adjacent to the areas that they were put in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. So again, before the reintroduction, they had to make it population rules, and they called them experimental. And again, all these labels begin to create a flexible wolf management scheme along the way. So whatever we did, we wanted to make sure that we could kill them. So the reintroduction went ahead in 95 and 96 with 66 wolves. We have about 2,000 wolves today. Again, these wolves are experimental, non-essential populations of wolves, which gives us a lot of flexibility to do whatever we need to do to control them, remove them, and deal with problems that they create. So anyway, there's one of my touchy-feely pictures you'll see along the way. All right, then again, along the way, after the population was increasing, another rule was created, the 10J rule, which you can go home and read about. But essentially, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service required state and tribal wolf management plans in preparation for the delisting of wolves, so that the states told the feds how they're going to take care of and manage them. And again, the 10J rule, mainly what to be aware of, it allowed people to harass wolves, to kind of protect their interests, whether it's livestock or whatever, using certain non-lethal tools without killing them. But it also allowed then for kill permits. So as the numbers grew, now we can give kill permits to people to kill wolves. And the concern with private landowners was you had to catch a wolf in the act of. You had to have its teeth sunk onto the hind leg of a calf or whatever. And then if you were a public grazer, you needed to have written authorization, which was provided. All this time, we had to make sure that the wolf population was protected and not going into any kind of a dangerous decline. And then mainly it was, again, to minimize conflicts with livestock, but also it added in the potential or the ability to kill wolves if they ate elk or deer or some prey species that might be reduced and take away from humans' opportunity to recreate and hunt. And I'll try and remember to tell you, and I maybe jump ahead right now, that they just killed month of February in Idaho. We again just had 7 more wolves shot from a helicopter for eating elk, which is bizarre. All right, another scenario that's really kind of tough to handle too is when the feds recovered wolves and they were delisted. If you read, almost every state is similar. I just took this out of Idaho's bylaws. But when you get down toward the bottom, you'll notice again, as will protect, preserve, and perpetuate such wildlife and provide for the citizens of this state, and as by law permitted to others, continued supplies of such wildlife for hunting, fishing, and trapping. And I'll tell you, going to college as a wildlife student, and I'm sure it's the same today, we're indoctrinated. I mean, that's part of being a wildlife biologist, is understanding that when there's surplus animals, you allow hunting, fishing, and trapping of those creatures. So Why do a lot of wildlife biologists not get involved? Why don't they speak up for wolves or anything? Well, because that's what their job is, to provide this recreational opportunity to their constituents who hunt, fish, and trap. So where's the evil start, or where's the evil begin? Be aware that most states have a Fish and Game Commission. I'm just going to talk about Idaho because there's probably variations from state to state, but it's all pretty much similar. First of all, they're appointed by the governor. In Idaho, we have a Republican governor, and I don't think we have more than maybe 16 Democrats in the entire legislature in Idaho. So you can see what we're up against there. The state of Idaho, since the talk about reintroduction, has said, we don't want them, don't bring them here, don't dump them on us. So there's been a resistance in Idaho from day one to put wolves there, but it happened. This was congressionally mandated. So the wolves are there. So be aware then of these Fish and Game Commissions. They're confirmed by the Senate. There's 7 in Idaho. You have to be a resident. You get to be in there for a 4-year term. Doesn't say much here, no more than 4 from the same political party. And they meet about 4 times a year and get paid a nominal fee. Interestingly, the Fish and Game Commission, being appointed by the governor, doesn't require you have any special talents. Mainly it requires that you're interested in hunting, fishing, and trapping, and probably are a license holder. And this is our current commission. And I can't tell you, but I mean, they're loggers, lawyers, medical doctors, anybody who's interested and who the governor feels would fit on this commission. But look at the power they have. They supervise wildlife biologists, they administer fish and game policy, establish regulations, controls on fishing, hunting, and trapping, and they approve department budgets. So here you got this bunch of appointed citizens, like any one of us in this room, and you have that kind of power over wildlife professionals. Interestingly now, this is where the process is so simple. If first of all, you got to realize Fish and Wildlife agencies mainly work for their constituents, hunters, fishermen, and trappers, and operate off of the money they get from sale of fishing and hunting and trapping tags. But currently, like in Idaho, if you're a trapper and you get this harebrained idea that wolves are a problem, wolves are eating all our elk, wolves are killing all our livestock. Interestingly, we don't really have all those problems. We have an abundance of elk in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Right now, it's the golden era of elk hunting. We set a record deer harvest in 2015 in Idaho. So really, there's not this need to kill them other than the fact that trappers love to kill them because they can sell their pelts and they get to go out and kill wolves and coyotes, whatever, all winter. So anyway, the process is simple. Trapper goes to his Fish and Game Commissioner, who represents his part of the state, and that commissioner thinks, hey, yeah, cool, let's kill some more wolves. So he brings it back to the rest of his buddies there, and they talk about this suggestion. And if the rest of the boys on the commission decide that that's not a bad idea, they're going to run it by the Idaho department themselves and see how they react to it. And then through a series of rule regulation proposals, comment periods, proposal modifications, public comment periods, and then perhaps having to go through the legislature, these crazy rules happen. And I suggest Casey York is here today and Mark Cook from up in Montana. Talk to them and find out just how crazy this is getting. So in Idaho, what's happened under the commission's permission? We have continuous open season on wolves in the northern portion of Idaho on private lands. Kill them year-round, doesn't say females, puppies, whatever, are protected. We also have a season open from August 31st to March 31st, so half of the year you can kill wolves. Just based on a commission decision a little over 2 weeks ago, or under 2 weeks ago, you can now, if you're a trapper or a hunter, resident or non-resident, depending what you want to spend, but one person can kill 32 wolves in the state of Idaho during that period of time. And they just a week ago decided that if you're a trapper and you want to buy hunting tags, you can put your hunting license on a wolf. So each trapper can kill 20 wolves. And then there's a group called Foundation for Wildlife Management, which is a bunch of trappers who formed this group, and they're raising money to pay bounties to you to kill wolves. So there's not enough people participating, so let's encourage people to kill them. So we'll give you up to $1,000 to help you offset your costs and your fuel to kill wolves, especially in those northern districts in Idaho, to bring the numbers down. And one of the problems is they don't have enough hunters and trappers to get the job done, so that's why they're liberalizing those who really put the effort in to kill 30 wolves or whatever, and help offset the cost for you to do that. All right, in Idaho, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, the Idaho Wolf Control Board, it was a temporary setup since 2014. Legislature pretty much unanimously voted in this board, so I'm thinking it's going to be around for a long time to come. So what do? Through legislative appropriations for 5 straight years, ending in 2018, they're giving $400,000 a year to this board. They're banking the money, and the money is to help Wildlife Services, who I used to work for way back in my career, give them funding, provide them funding for any necessary wolf removal. So Wildlife Services, though their budgets have been declining, the state of Idaho is willing to offset that so that if they need to put a helicopter up, don't quibble and split hairs over with, you got the money, we've got it, and we'll give it to you. And on top of that, the livestock industry contributes $110,000 annually, and so does the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. So they've got this huge war chest in excess of $1 million, and it's for Wildlife Services to kill wolves, but last year Wildlife Services was against the ropes because they weren't killing enough wolves, the number they were taking for control. So the state of Idaho has put pressure on Wildlife Services to be killing them more often, which means maybe confirming more kills. And down here I mentioned change of definition. The latest gimmick between some individual ranchers and Wildlife Services is to try and, wolves bite animals, cause trauma and hemorrhage and bleeding. Now they're trying to push myopathy. Wolves run the animals to death. So if they got bite wounds, the wolves directly killed them. If they don't have bite wounds, the wolves run them to death. And it just gets more and more ridiculous. If I write another book, it's going to be about that wolf right there, and that's all I'm going to tell you. So, USDA Wildlife Services, I worked for them for 26 years and learned an awful lot and changed my ways. So anyway, how does Wildlife Services work? Well, they're under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they're basically the hired guns for the wildlife industry, or for the livestock industry and several other organizations. I could say the wildlife industry too, because they're also authorized by states to go out and shoot wolves for eating elk or any other problem the state determines exists. They operate in most states, and in recent years, I think they're less of a concern because their budgets have declined. But if the states keep pumping money into Wildlife Service, it revitalizes them and gives them that budget to operate and do things they probably wouldn't normally be doing now. And the USDA's appropriations come from cooperative funds, so they have livestock tax, they call them, or license fees. Ranchers tax themselves like 50 cents a head or $1 a head for sheep and cattle, and that money is put into their budgets. And then now with these state legislated funds, and the rest of it is federal tax dollars, your dollars that fund them. So just a sketch here, because these numbers are dynamic. They change from year to year, but just give you an idea, the states are mostly, I'm going to say, killing in the range of 300 wolves a year now, that or more, through hunting, trapping, snaring, and Wildlife Services control operations. So in 2018, 395 wolves died in Idaho. And the way that we're documenting wolf deaths is, this is the good thing about Idaho, if anything else, is they have this big game management report that has to be filled out for every wolf that dies, so that the state can keep track of where they're being killed and collect other data off of them. Again, how many wolves do we have? Well, we estimate 800 to 1,000. The interesting part now is, as we're getting into aggressive wolf killing, we're also getting away from radio collaring. And that's something I always wanted to see, the day we didn't collar more wolves. But now we're not going to really know exactly how many we had, because the collars helped us keep track of packs and pup counts and reproduction. They've gone to a new system now of picking up wolf scat and doing DNA fingerprinting and taking public reports using trail cameras and the likes. Again, it's becoming more of a guesstimate than an exact count. And if you look at that number there, I mean, it's approaching 40 to 50% of the population being killed last year. I don't know what the numbers are going to finally be for this coming year. And so Montana can just give you another different angle. Is I think our wolf licenses are less than $19 in Idaho. So if you get anything from this, is it's really cheap to get a license to kill a wolf, and there's no limit on the number of tags. So here in Montana, 2017, I don't know what they're selling now, but it tells you there's a lot of people want to kill them. And 2017, 2018, interestingly, I think this just come to an end recently in mid-March in Montana. They set a new record kill, 315 wolves. And the last time I saw a count, they were estimating they had 627, so that would tell me they killed half of the wolves in the state of Montana this past season. Another thing that happened when each state had to write a wolf conservation and management plan, one of the requirements at the time was to get rid of archaic laws. Anything on the books that referred to wolves as predators, vermin, get rid of any bounty laws that were required. And interestingly, the Fish and Wildlife Service somehow, after a long, long battle with Wyoming, let them off the hook. And so in their final plan, an arrangement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in Wyoming now, 85% of the state wolves can be killed year-round. They're vermin. They're no different than a ground squirrel or a prairie dog. To anybody that sees one, you can kill them. The only management or any kind of regulation going on is up in the very northwest corner of the state, right near Yellowstone National Park. Again, you can see here's just an example of what Wildlife Services took out. 2016, over 100 wolves. In hunting, when wolves were, they just got delisted, and the first quota was 44 wolves, and they quickly filled that. Nothing to it. So what do? This past year now, they immediately raised it to 58. So next year, is it going to be 65 or 70? The next year, 80? But anyway, right out of the newspaper reports and the Wyoming Department of Fish and Game have said our objective is to diminish this wolf population. And there are about 25,000 elk overmanagement objectives in the state of Wyoming, and yet there's no attempt to reduce wolf harvest because of that. State of Montana, I'll quickly say, when we did the wolf introduction in 95 and 96, there were an estimated 92,000 elk in the state of Montana. 23 years later, with whatever number Montana has, and around the Yellowstone area, the population today is 167,000 elk in the state of Montana. Population's doubled. Again, wolf harvest going up, not going down. And nobody's comparing anything. It's apples and oranges. So what if we got a surplus of elk? That doesn't have anything to do with us killing wolves. And the real concern, especially with wolf advocates and people who are really concerned about the social structure of wolf packs, there's no consideration of that. These wolf packs, in order to operate and function as packs, they need the adult leaders. They need an array of subadults to help hunt and feed the pups, and the pups need parental guidance to grow up to learn to be a wolf and function. Again, hunting, trapping, and snaring takes away all of the concerns about that. It's a random, helter-skelter killing method. Okay, wolves are moving out of Idaho and coming from Canada into Oregon and Washington. There's about 120 wolves in the northeast corner of Washington, and about that same number mostly concentrated in the eastern and northeastern corner of Oregon. Again, and then I'll mention too that the eastern portions of the two states have been federally delisted. However, there's still protection of wolves. But again, problem wolves can be killed in these two states. And the politicians and the legislators in those portions of the state where the wolves are the most concentrated are making every effort to fast-track delisting, to step away from their management plans and maybe manipulate a few lines. Let's speed this up. But there's this need to start killing problem wolves. In the western half, there's still pretty much hands-off protection. But since I've retired, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service want to dump wolves. They want to delist them. They want to get away from it as quick as possible, and they want to hand it over to the states to do their own management. And I also mention in this part of the country, Oregon and Washington, that the states, because wildlife services have been involved in so many lawsuits and been hampered in helping them do control, those two states just hire their own helicopter and they use their own state biologists to kill wolves in that state. So wildlife services is a much lesser player currently. So the books that I'm selling here on the cover is Spitfire, and I had no idea at the time. My wife Jenny is in the audience here, and she picked that photo for my book. But interestingly, Spitfire has been the center of controversy because she wandered out near Cook City, Montana this year from Yellowstone and was killed by a hunter. So I couldn't say it any better. Dr. Dave Meach, in his book, The Wolf in 1970, said this: it's as applicable today as it was back then. And if people don't wake up and get involved and commit to supporting wolves and getting involved in the political process, I think you're going to see those numbers diminish down to the bare minimum. And the states are gambling that that isn't going to happen, because if they go below 150 wolves in each of the states, they can be relisted and back under federal protection. If we don't know how many we got and we keep aggressively killing them, when are we going to cross that threshold, and who's going to recognize when it happens? Thank you. No question. We'll start with her, and then I'll come over to you, sir.
So I'm wondering, Mr. Niemeyer, you don't breeding rules as part of your job. What changed your mind about killing? What made you think it wasn't the right thing to do?
Thanks for asking. She asked what changed me. Well, I worked for Wildlife Services, and when I began working for them, I grew up as a hunter and a trapper, and I was a committed soul to the organization of Wildlife Services. We were there to help protect the ranchers. But as I worked at the job, and we relentlessly, mostly it was coyotes we killed, put up airplanes, helicopters. I used to be a supervisor, so I kept the helicopter moving from trapper to trapper to trapper, and we slaughtered coyotes year-round, mostly in the winter. And there's two kinds of control, corrective and preventative. Corrective is when you got a couple of coyotes killing sheep and you go in and remove those two. Preventative is the rest of the year we're killing coyotes because they might eat a sheep. And I just lost my enthusiasm and my commitment to that because it was senseless. Because, and we'll talk about that with derbies too. I mean, it's just to go out and kill coyotes, why? And they're prolific and they're resilient, and they just fill in. And I could tell you all kinds of stories where, and one of my favorite stories with coyotes were that if you have coyotes or wolves living around your livestock and they're not killing them, the best thing you can do is leave those animals there. They're protecting a territory, keeping potentially other animals out. So one year in central Montana, we sent the helicopter out in the winter and flew around a sheep operation that really wasn't having problems, and killed 20, 30 coyotes, whatever. 2 days later, the rancher called and asked me, do coyotes revenge kill? And I didn't know what he was talking about. But essentially what happened was we shot a bunch of coyotes out that were established around his sheep ranch, and everything was cool. They were almost like guard dogs for his sheep. Other coyotes immediately were coming in from surrounding areas, filling in that area, and some of those like to eat sheep. So we've created a problem. And it's the same way, you can talk about lion hunting, bear hunting, and the dynamics. Hunting and killing a lot of these species actually creates problems. Cumulatively, all of that affected me till it's like, I don't want any more to do with it. I don't believe in it. So I'm telling you what I believe in today.
First, do not try and feather me, run me out on my way. So Idaho is Idaho. Citizens support the hunting, fishing, trapping. Seems like the Wildlife Services support all that. What could we, do as outside of Idaho, do to prevent that, or is Idaho just a lost state, and is it worth not pursuing, or?
Excellent. Did everybody hear the question? If your state has a shade of pink or purple, I think something can be done. Idaho, currently, I have no answers to this. I'm going to go back. There's a new commissioner that represents me in Boise, and he and I are scheduled to have coffee when I get back from this trip. And I'm going to talk to him, because I went to the last commission meeting, told him there were some just blatant lies presented to him. He didn't know. Those guys don't have much background in history. So I think there's hope, and again, talk to Mark Cook, talk to Casey and other people here who are fighting the good fight in Montana and Wyoming, and see what you can do to either contribute or volunteer and get involved. I think these commission meetings too, I mean, first of all, you got to be informed if you're going to go to them, because if you go there uninformed and make brash statements, they use that against you. You don't know what you're talking about. So, but they really need presence at these Fish and Game Commission meetings. More people to stand up and say, yeah, me too. Yeah.
It's a long-term commitment, but one of the things that a couple of things we're trying to do is to change the RSA of how a commissioner gets assigned. In our state, they have to have a hunting, fishing, trapping license 5 out of 10 years prior to their appointment. We want that not to be the priority, but to have 5 to 10 years of land management, wildlife management, conservation, on and on and on. The other thing we're trying to do is to get a dog and pony show for each one of the campuses in the colleges and universities in the state, because we find that the young people are more impassioned about this cause. And a third thing to try to do is to change the wildlife services name in the state from Fish and Game to Fish and Wildlife. So
Yep.
take the game component out of it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. We have to wait and see.
Those are all excellent ideas. And I'm hoping there's some fertile ground in here today where somebody has got ideas, because those are all great ideas.
Here's a follow-up to what my wife just spoke about. Coyotes, eastern coyotes. We didn't have coyotes for a long time. They were eradicated back in the day, and they've come back, and they're pretty good size now. And we're the state of New Hampshire, and our state motto is live free or die. Okay, so you can imagine what we're up against now, because there's nothing on the books for coyotes anymore. And so even to broach the conversation is, it's not a problem, so let's not have legislation around it. So it's going to be a long uphill battle, but that's where we are at the moment. So
Yep.
It just is what it is. But
Yeah, and the whole thing again, it's not that killing coyotes is going to eradicate them.
No.
Actually, being part of Wildlife Services since the mid-'70s and knowing it functioned since the turn of the century, coyotes have pretty much covers the lower 48 states. So we've spent billions of dollars trying to kill them off, and all we've done is spread them.
The question that I have sort of piggybacks on your Fish and Game versus Fish and Wildlife, except that it's sort of, when trying to talk to people and educate people about it, people think that Fish and Wildlife is to protect fish and wildlife. And how do we explain it in such a way to say that yes and no? You know what I mean? There's such a disconnect between what Fish and Wildlife actually does and what people, the general population, think that they do. They think, oh, Fish and Wildlife would protect wolves. In fact, they're killing them. So how, it seems like you have found a good way to sort of speak both languages. How do we as advocates speak to other people to explain to them really what's happening without sounding condescending or obnoxious wolf crazy freak?
It's a lot of people are at disadvantage doing that. I mean, I am lucky enough to have the experience that I can speak to ranchers or hunters, and they put me down, they insult me too, but I've been there, I've done it, and they know that. But again, I just think we need to teach people the simple processes of, when you kill coyotes, they can actually, in places, get thicker. You cause them to reproduce. You may cause their puppies to actually survive where they couldn't have survived. So that's partly what my messages are, just trying to go back to basics and remind people, what is the problem? And I'm not sure you win, because hunters and trappers, a lot of them, in their minds, you need to kill them. You need to kill coyotes. We got to keep things in balance. And then I asked them, I said, but your 30,000 elk over management objectives, well, that's not enough. But that's just the southern part. We're talking about the north. So they all have their arguments. So I'm not telling you it's easy. In fact, it's very frustrating for me. But I'm going back to the wolf reintroduction and knowing that we spent, on average, for over nearly 20 years, 3.5, $4 million a year of your tax dollars to reestablish a population of wolves. And everyone loves them and everyone supports them until it comes down to you need to go to a commission meeting, you need to write letters, you need to be involved, and everybody, well, I got to take my kids to the soccer game, and I mean, every time there's a commission meeting, I read about all the people, hey, you know, Casey, give them hell for me. I can't go. And so you have the same couple of people giving it their all, and there's nobody to back them, and that's where I think, too, we've got to change that totally around.
You stated that when the populations drop to 150, then they can go back on the endangered species list. And so my question is, how did they come up with 150? And what is the process it would take to get that changed to an ecologically effective population?
Okay, well, all the numbers we used to reach wolf recovery were minimums. So originally, when we did the wolf reintroduction, it was to get back in the 3 states, 3 recovery areas, 300 wolves in 30 breeding pairs for 3 consecutive years, equitably distributed over those 3 recovery areas. We accomplished that in 2002. So then the states, writing their wolf conservation and management plans, figured, okay, that means there's going to be 100 in our state, 100 in our state, and 100 in our state. Then we can start killing them. Well, then the Fish and Wildlife Service said, well, you need a threshold to know when you're approaching 100. So each state, I would say randomly or for convenience, picked 150. So each state raised that threshold to 150 with 15 breeding pairs. And so they had that, there's a buffer there. So that's, and these are all minimums. But the states, hunters, trappers, ranchers, everybody said, you said 100. So we got 2,000. So why don't we get rid of these other 1,700 wolves? Or now that we've changed it, maintain 450 in the 3 states. Anything over that is excess baggage. But ask your Fish and Wildlife Agency, do you manage black bears that close? Do you manage mountain lions that close? Do you manage any species with that kind of threshold? And right now, how wolves are dying, I mean, everybody think, well, if Wildlife Services and hunters and trappers are the cause of death, what's the problem? We're not even considering disease. We're not considering parvo or considering mange, considering catastrophic things that can happen to the population that has nothing to do with this. So again, it seems sensible to not be managing them so severely. And I can see the wolf that's getting into livestock, yeah, you might have to kill it. But I could talk all day about non-lethal, which I'm not here to do. But there's a lot of ways that people can protect their livestock, and that's a lot what we're doing with our workshops. And I also suggest to you that ranchers aren't your enemy. Some ranchers, but don't get in a fight with the livestock industry and, we need to get rid of all the cattle, get rid of all the sheep, and problem's over. They're not going to go away. The livestock industry is powerful. But I go out and randomly talk to ranchers in your neighborhood. I know a lot of ranchers that don't allow hunting and trapping of coyotes because they eat ground squirrels. And they consider them, kind of like the old barn cat. So, and I'm working with ranchers and I'm learning from them. Karen Bardeman has set up these workshops that I've been doing with Joe Engelhardt out of Longview, Alberta, and Hillary Anderson from Tom Minor Basin. And they're teaching stockmanship. They live in wolf grizzly country, and they're maintaining sustainable livestock operations, and they're not having livestock damage by grizzlies and wolves, some, but pretty much nope, not a problem. And so they're telling these ranchers that we're doing these workshops with that we're maintaining a sustainable operation, and we're not killing predators. Joe Engelhardt hasn't killed a wolf in his area for 16 years. And those ranchers that we talk to, we just come from Colorado. I mean, they really makes them blink when they hear this from people like that. But it doesn't necessarily get them to think wolves are a good idea in their neighborhood. So anyway, we're all doing our little parts to just, you know, chip away at this thing and trying to, I hate the word educate, but inform and try and dismiss some of the mythologies and bring people in that are living examples of how it can be done with some responsible livestock management.
Thank you, Carter, very much.
Thank you.